Progress and setbacks on EU enlargement, an 11th hour deal on EU climate targets, and a disgraced former EU Commissioner being charged with money laundering. The big topics up for discussion in the corridors of the EU quarter this week. Welcome to Brussels, My Love, the podcast with me, Maeve McMahon. For this very first episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Cynthia Mhurchú, MEP from Renew Europe, affiliated, of course, to Ireland's Fianna Fáil. Teresa, Küchler, Brussels-based correspondent for the Swedish daily Svenska Dagbladet, following Brussels for some 20 years now, Teresa.
Oof, I'm old, yeah.
And Stefan, correspondent with Euronews since 1996. Is that correct?
Yeah, talking about age, we don't want to get into this.
I must be the youngest, surely, in the room then.
Age means wisdom. So I am thrilled to have you all here. So thank you for taking time out. It was, of course, a very busy week. And all eyes were on that topic of EU enlargement. Euronews, of course, held a very fascinating 3.5 hour live show earlier in the week in front of a fantastic audience in Brussels on the topic. And also it was a topic that kind of lost its momentum during the commission of Jean-Claude Juncker when he said he kind of put it on hold for a couple of years. But it has made a bit of a comeback now under the commission of President Ursula von der Leyen, of course, mainly due to the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Let's cut to the chase. Those enlargement report cards, if you like, came out this week on 10 different countries. Teresa, I'm turning to you. Did you read the reports? I mean, we're talking about almost 1,500 pages here, so obviously you didn't get through them all. But what were the big takeaways?
For me was the optimism. This how the European Union has become like an existential need for many countries. Obviously, maybe not the ones who's been in the queue forever, like, I don't know, Montenegro, but for instance, like for Moldova, Ukraine, how Europe is again seen as, a shelter, a savior, a protection against, we're in the middle of a war right now. So, of course, the first thing that happened when the war started was that Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia applied for membership to the EU as a panic reaction. And I don't know, I think the European Union sometimes lacks that kind of existential thing. It was supposed to heal the wounds of Europe, the European Union, after wars.
And meanwhile, as you said, there's some countries who's waiting for a long time, 2 decades. If you think about countries like Montenegro, Albania. Montenegro wants to be the next. They say we should be 28 members by 28. Cynthia Mhurchú, what is the view in the Parliament on this? Is there optimism, as Teresa said, in the Parliament for a further member state?
Oh, I think there's optimism, and there always has to be optimism, particularly when my party, my group, Renew Europe, we want to espouse all the qualities and all the priorities of Europe, and they being stability and democracy, more members, once they're fully vetted, I hasten to add, and once they align themselves with the priorities and the philosophy and the politics of Europe and so forth, it's always good. We need more economic growth and market expansion. We've seen how we've been held to ransom and are currently held to ransom by the tariff war that is raging at the other side of the Atlantic. And we also need to, I do believe, increase and enhance our geographical influence. And we also should strive, and Europe was based on this, that cultural and social integration that is so important to avoid and, I suppose, negate the rise of the far right and communities and countries feeling left behind. And also then there is a historical and a moral obligation to bring all the countries within the landmass of Europe, if I could describe it as that, to bring them into the European Union, into the fold. Yes, of course there were countries that were scored lowly. And I did see a headline, I think the European Commission criticised both Serbia and Georgia on Tuesday, but they heaped praise on Ukraine and Montenegro. And I appreciate countries are waiting for, yes, and I appreciate countries are waiting for a long time. But I trust in the due diligence that is being carried out by the Commission. And I do think the due diligence is really important in the current geopolitical environment, because we don't particularly want to make a mistake from the point of view of politics, but also from the point of view of economics. We know that the budget of Europe is under huge pressure because of the required focus now on defence and security.
Stefan, as I said, you've been covering Europe and Brussels and the EU since the 90s for Euronews. What is your take? How could this union of 27 work if we see Montenegro joined by 28 and perhaps Albania?
Well, first of all, I always like dealing with candidate countries because these are the only voices who are really excited about Europe, who sing the European anthem the loudest, who praise Europe's values and everything that comes with it. And that's it. Nobody else in the existing EU does that the way the candidate countries do that. Now, You're right. We've seen these report cards, the last report cards, the latest report cards. We've seen many, many report cards in the past, and nothing happened. You failed to mention Turkey. Turkey is dwelling in the EU waiting
Turkey is
room
one of the
for
10,
more than a quarter century. And I'm afraid to say that we're going to see other countries like Serbia, Georgia, Ukraine, for that matter, also in that waiting room for a very, 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 very long time. They might get their economic numbers right, but, the final push is still missing.
I'm always asking myself, do they even want to join after having to wait for so long? And I actually caught up with one expert, Rainer Jarsma. He said he thinks they do want to join, but not as much as they did before.
They still want to join the EU, but just not as much as they used to. I think there's this underlying cynicism in the Balkans that the region only gets attention because of geopolitical developments elsewhere. But these countries have been stuck in the waiting room for so long that people in the region, they're hesitant to believe that there is genuine momentum or that there is indeed a real push for enlargement. That's also because when you look at von der Leyen's messaging at her speeches, you see that she's trying to emphasize, this genuine perspective. She praises these local reforms that the majority of the population doesn't actually really experience. And people wonder if EU officials actually know what's going on the ground in the region.
I have to say, we have to remember that these are the Commission evaluations of these countries. The Commission has a job to do these evaluations and to endorse enlargement. I think if you ask the average European out in the streets in our countries, they say, I'd love for Switzerland to join and maybe Norway. And why not Liechtenstein? Absolutely. I'm not so sure about a country like Ukraine who's in a war with Russia right now, or a bunch of really poor and countries that are corruption-ridden. And I think there is an optimism that comes from the European Commission. It is not shared by member state. And I think we're going to have a ratification process that is super, super slow.
Look at France and Germany. They're lukewarm. I mean, they really don't want to have this on their agenda.
Teresa's right, but just to clarify, Ukraine would never be allowed to join whilst the war is raging. We all know that. And hopefully that war will be put to an end very soon, because it's been going on for far too long, with far too many loss of lives, but also very damaging to Europe. And recently I visited some of the countries on the eastern flank, in particular I was in Tallinn, and they are extremely nervous, and it is distorting the debate back in Europe. For example, my little country on the western side, Ireland, doesn't quite understand, the citizens don't quite understand and get the fact that defence and security is so important and so vital, and the budget spend has to be pivoted towards that. But I do think that countries I think countries overall are very positive about joining Europe because Europe works. And I'm unapologetic.
Does it though? I mean, as an MEP with 720 MEPs.
About that. I'm unapologetic. I'm a proud European. I'm a proud member of the European Parliament. It's not perfect in every way. And
but how does it work with 720 MEPs? There's so many.
I'll tell you how it works. It actually brings together countries. We saw how it worked when it came to the pandemic. We saw that. There's one glaringly good example. We saw how Europe came together for Ireland when Brexit came about. And we see how it works in other ways. And I could quote things like uniformity of certain services within the medical side of things and procedures and so forth. I could talk about uniformity and the obvious goal towards carbon emission reduction, which was full of chat this week in the Commission. So, look, there are many things that don't work, but I'm always focusing on the positive things. And Europe is very important. It's very important to stabilise our landmass, our bloc here, because look at what's happening in America, look at what's happening in China, look at these governments and these authoritarian regimes that we just cannot trust anymore.
But loud and clear, I think loud and clear from the Commission this week is a message to Vladimir Putin in Moscow, which is, look at all these countries that are with us, they're under our umbrella should they want to. We are watching their cases and we do not want them to turn to you. The door on your side is closed and the door on our side is open. And I think that's the message.
I want to comment on Cynthia's remarks. Europe works. I believe that too. And it works because we're dealing with 27 democracies. And in a democracy, finding consensus is a messy job. The sausage being made isn't pretty, but it works. And it worked for the countries at the periphery in the past, countries like Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Greece, who came to Europe as poor countries.
Yes.
Ireland was very poor and just traded with their neighbour.
Benefited big time from the European Union membership.
And now we're contributors back to it.
I think we have reached the limit. Now, there are polls out there who say that half of the Europeans, 56% of people say, yes, we want an enlarged Europe. Yeah. But they're thinking of Norway, Iceland. Some even say Canada. Why not? But now the candidate countries all have considerable baggage. Montenegro is kind of a Russian mafia money-based
certainly has that
economy.
Yes,
Moldova has the Transnistria problem that nobody talks about.
Yes.
Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo. So once you look at these countries individually, we're going to have problems one day. Yes. We're going to have problems when the new member countries are basically papered over their past ethnic conflicts. Mm-hmm. I mean, then even the 27 democracies in the West cannot solve these issues. That's the big problem here.
Yeah, and yet we can't dismiss the potential for a country to change. I don't mean to sound like Pollyanna politics coming out here and pie in the sky, but at the same time, when we see some of the states which were part of Russia, some of those nations, and now they're part of Europe, and when the voters saw how their civil rights and how all their priorities changed and improved with Europe, we do see potential for countries and for politics to change. But you're quite right. We have to exercise really extreme caution.
How do your readers feel about this topic about EU enlargement?
Listen, I just came back from Armenia, where I spent a week, and for the Armenians, it's a matter of survival, basically. If you look at a map, they have Russia on one side, Iran on one side, Turkey on one side, and then Georgia on one side. And Georgia is now turning away from the EU.
And Armenia aspire to be with Brussels,
Armenia
but they're not a candidate country yet.
It's a little island, a little democratic island with very, very powerful and quite dangerous, possibly dangerous neighbours. And for them, it's a matter of survival. And I have to tell a little joke, because we're in an informal setting. I have to tell a joke. They were saying that they would like to join the European Union together with Georgia, because the two countries are similar in size, and both of them are lost little islands on the map between these gigantic powers. And they say we could join together. We can even join as one country, and then we could call ourselves Giorgio Armani.
Could I just say, we should look beyond enlargement as well to, you've mentioned Canada, to countries who want to become more integrated with Europe and trade more with Europe and have much more tourism with Europe. So you're back from Armenia. I'm back from a mission, the Canada-EU country delegation mission to Canada. They are the most EU country outside of the EU. Now, they'll never be able to join, or so we were informed, because of the big amount of sea waters between us and so forth. But even the fact that they can't join, it doesn't take away from the fact that that market, and it is a huge market, it needs to be further enhanced and developed. And I understand that the EU is looking to that with the CETA, the full ratification of member states who haven't ratified it. I just want hands up here.
The Canadian trade agreement.
Yes. Ireland is just about to finalise its ratification of it, but there are other states that haven't. And we should be looking at that as well as enlargement within the EU landmass.
Indeed. But is that really realistic? I mean, you mentioned Armenia. I have lived in France for a long time. There are a lot of ex-Armenians, of people of Armenian origin living in France.
600,000, I think.
600,000. And all the fans of Charles Aznavour love to see Armenia somehow, close. But Turkey, after a quarter century, didn't make it, and they probably will never make it into the EU. Now, every country that is east of Turkey is even more questionable.
Yes.
And what if we say yes to Armenia? Then how about Kazakhstan? And a country that participates in the European football championship, right? So there are, and this is the problem that we cannot bring to our people, to our citizens here. If we push that too far, people will turn away from Europe.
And this is politics. This is real politics. Because we're threatened by Russia. We don't want those countries closer to Russia to lose faith and obviously to fall into the wrong hands and be beholden to the likes of Putin, a complete dictator, a vicious dictator. So it's a game of politics.
But it's a fascinating topic. I must say, I could talk about EU enlargement for hours. I find it fascinating as a topic. And we've obviously been covering it all week on Euronews.com. So please take a look at our website if you want to have any more information on any of those countries we mentioned, because of course there's a lot to get through. Because we also wanted to talk about the COP30. It is, of course, taking place in Brazil, and the EU has managed to come up with a position. It wasn't easy. Euronews reporter Marta Patsego, who covers climate policy, has been taking a look and sent us an update on this very, very intense week.
Yes, Maeve. EU environment ministers finally agreed on a controversial position that will mandate the EU to cut 90% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, like carbon dioxide and methane, after intense talks that went into the night on Tuesday with an agreement only struck by Wednesday morning. After months of stalling over a major decision that will impact European economy and industries, perhaps the ministers' sleep deprivation helped forge a deal or the pressure to arrive at the COP30. Many critics say that the revision of the bloc's climate law was watered down with the amount of flexibilities included to help EU countries reach the goals. Among those are the carbon credits, also seen as polluting credits, a revision clause that gives space for further amendments, and an emergency brake. Now over to lawmakers in the European Parliament to adopt their position.
That was Marta Patsego there. And of course, as she said, all eyes now on the European Parliament to give a green light to this. What is your take on the position?
Thankfully, we got an agreement. And I know that 2 countries abstained, and I know that other countries obviously voted against, but they got the qualified majority. That's the main thing. And it's quite clear that the high-level ambition is still on target. We're still on target for that as we head into the COP30 climate summit in Brazil. So that's giving the bloc a unified presence, a unified argument. And that's really important.
But it's really watered down. There's so much flexibility in there. I mean, there's so many little points. Like,
yes, Maeve, of course. You're wonderful
it's a perfect
journalist.
Brussels fudge,
you know
right?
that.
Yes.
Well, look, sometimes in politics, unfortunately, there has to be a fudge because, we've a war raging on the western side of Europe.
So we wouldn't have had that fudge reverse a couple of years.
I hope we wouldn't, because I wasn't in the last mandate, but these commentators at the table, Stefan and Teresa, they will be well able to comment on this. But certainly what I saw as a punter, as a voter in the last mandate was that not only was there loads of legislation showing this ambition with regards to the zero carbon, the targets and so forth, and the greening agenda, which is so important, but that more than that, there was going to be action taken and action swiftly taken. But obviously, in this mandate, a lot has changed because of the continuance.
And the EU wanted to be the leader, but now it's kind of the loser over there.
And I still believe we've great politicians in the Parliament who obviously espouse that, including myself. But unfortunately, citizens live in the real world and with real budgets and limitations.
I was quite surprised at how good it was, the deal. I have to say, I thought it would be watered down to a lot less. Because if you look at 5 years ago, people were falling over each other in this city to shake hands with Greta Thunberg, the whole green thingy. Like, they were all wanting to be doing selfies with her, and everybody was so green and so climate aware. And then all of a sudden, we started to see, these farmer riots everywhere and the backlash. And I thought the backlash was bigger than actually came out in the deal yesterday. I think they managed to salvage quite a lot, and for 2 reasons. One, it's not 2006, so we're not yet at the French election. The French presidential election next year would have been horrendous if they had to come up with a climate deal next year, because the French farmers have been completely hijacked by Marine Le Pen and the far right movement, who is claiming the farmers, the farmers' plague as their kind of their issue. And because we're not at a French election yet, it's next year, and also because the election in the Netherlands, last week. I think that if the far right had won there, it would have been a little bit the same. The Dutch farmers have been very, very angry with the EU climate agreements and plans. And now a Liberal party won there, so maybe they managed to call. I'm not as... I thought it was quite well done. You could have done a lot worse.
What's your take? I mean, is COP going to be a flop, Stefan, in your view? I feel like we have this conversation every year around this time.
We do. And, if you go back 5-10 years, Europe was the leading voice in the world when it comes to the fight against climate change.
Yeah.
We were spearheading global efforts to tackle this. With the help of the Americans, there was a president named Obama at the time, and the big climate agreement was signed in Paris. So it's a European brainchild, if you want. And where are we today? You might have, it's a little cynical, you say, it could have been worse. But the fact that they, half a year after they should have delivered it, come up with a watered down version of our plans, it kind of reflects, and I think I want to, take the 30,000 feet view here, because it's not only about climate, it's about many other political topics, that Europe was more progressive than the continent and the bloc as a whole was willing to follow.
Yes.
And this we see. Then we had the backlash. Many people say, well, in last year's European election, the far right gained. Well, the far right gained because people turned away from the pro-European parties who sponsored the climate policy, among other things. So this has been in the pipeline for quite some time. And what I accuse the politicians of is not having, taken the citizens by the hand and explained them correctly why we're doing this,
and of course,
why
as
it's
a
necessary,
politician,
and listen to all the stakeholders.
Yes, and as a politician, of course, I'm going to blame the Commission bringing in all this raft of legislation on the Greens. They didn't bring the farmers with them. I think the message completely collapsed. I think the ambition was fantastic. The lawyers were great. The legislators were great. We got all this fantastic amount of legislation to be rolled out and targets and so forth and the Paris Agreement. But little old farmer Joe that I represent, based in Wexford, in Ireland South, or perhaps in one of your own countries or whatever. You mentioned about the Dutch farmers and the French farmers and so forth. They weren't brought along. They didn't get an opportunity to buy into this. Now, what do I mean by buy-in? Because farmers were doing an awful lot on the ground anyway to green their whole farming process. But they weren't told, if you do this, then you will get a better budget, cap payments or whatever, greening payments. Instead, they got the greening payment lobbed in with their basic cap. Instead, they ended up worse. So, of course, it hit them doubly in the pocket. It was bound to fail, but nobody saw that failure coming from the Commission side. Perhaps you're right, Stefan. Perhaps the politicians in the last mandate didn't foresee this swiftly enough and properly enough and assess it. But that's why the farmer protests. And then, obviously, the war played into the hands of the farmers, dare I say it, but in a very, indirect way, so to speak. And they realised, we can't just do this greening. And do you know what? We're actually being flogged here. We're being flogged to death. You're flogging a dead horse.
And the momentum is just not there. You mentioned Teresa Greta Thunberg. Of course, she has focused on Gaza now. She's no longer on the streets. The Friday for Future marches have just stopped. Yeah. And of course, Frans Timmermans, the former commissioner in charge of the Green Deal, said it was thanks to her.
Now, it doesn't take away from all the awful events that we're seeing, whether it's in Spain with the floods, whether it's in...
year, in fact, since those tragic floods in Valencia, the Dana.
Exactly, the year. I think about that on this anniversary. Yes, so it's not taking away from that. But of course, Europe is now pivoting about that, and it's saying, well, look, we're talking about resilience now. And the resilience, of course, ties in nicely with the defence policy.
But it's interesting that we've hijacked this whole conversation talking about farmers when there's so much more at stake when it comes to costs.
The car industry is the perfect example. There's a big, in Germany, where I come from, the car industry is a big employer, very big employer, and is very influential. Yet they haven't managed the whole transition process from traditional fossil fuel engines to electric vehicles. And the car industry is in a very bad spot here because they have to produce basically two lines of cars.
Yes.
Electric vehicles for the European markets, where they become more and more popular and more affordable. But they also have export markets beyond Europe. Yes. And you cannot sell an electric vehicle to an African or Asian country.
But the two lines that you're talking about in Germany, they have been overshot by the Chinese, who have come in with their own electric car.
Teresa, final point on that?
No, I said the farmer is still the crucial because we like the farmer. Every voter likes the farmer. I have no particular warm feeling for the people who work producing, I don't know, these cups or these papers. But I do love Farmer Joe. He's a lovely man, isn't he? He walks there on his field and he gives me,
but at COP, we're
food
talking
on
about
my plate.
That potentially could disappear. But we will come back to that next week because I wanted to just mention one story briefly that, of course, had a lot of us here in Brussels talking about. Didier Reynders, a former Belgian commissioner responsible for justice, a former minister. He's been frequently as well a guest on Euronews. He has been charged, Teresa. Tell us more about this case. You've been looking into it. He's been buying National Lottery scratch cards to see his profits laundered back
this
to the
is such
account.
a typically Belgian story because Belgium is such a small country, and even embezzlement is almost on a small scale, kind of almost cute level. We have to say, however, of course, his presumption of innocence is there still. He's not convicted or anything, right? So let's just speculate. So he had 800,000 euros in cash on him, and he tried to deposit that into his bank account, and he did over 10 years. So after 10 years, the bank blew the whistle and said, well, you've deposited 800,000 euros in cash into your account. Let me remind you, in cash, okay, no banks accept the 500 euro notes or the 200 euro notes. We're talking 20 euro notes and 50 euro notes. He had to either walk into the bank office a couple of times a month, go up to the counter and say, look, I have 3,000 euros. I have a little pile here of 20 euro bills. Can you put it into my account? Or he must have walked into one of those kind of reverse ATM machines.
Yes.
Where you slide in
the
150 bills or something each time. 80,000 euros a year, 800,000.
So
and when he couldn't do that anymore because the bank said stop, he started buying lottery tickets. So he went to a gas station in the neighbourhood where he lives and started buying lottery ticket, paying cash, 3,000 euros each time.
So this is what's happening in Brussels.
Belgium is the
scandalous.
center, I think the world center of comic strips and cartoons.
Yes,
this
it is.
sounds like a story right out of
true.
a comic.
And earlier we were saying how Brussels and the EU works
The
for
question is,
citizens,
of course,
but this
where do the 800 grand come from in the
Yes,
first
they
place?
say he sold a couple of paintings or some antiquities
Right,
or
that
something.
is a little murky.
That's what he says.
It is a little murky
But
as
surely
well.
people knew.
The fact that somebody buys, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of lottery tickets to launder money, where
It's
you could
hilarious.
basically
Cynthia, how do
throw
you
the
manage to
money
hide
in
this?
the North Sea, right? That's the same effect.
He has admitted to buying the ticket. By the way, he has admitted to all of this. He says, I sold a couple of paintings or antiquities for cash. I needed to deposit them. I went to the bank, and when I couldn't do that anymore, I went and I bought a lottery. But so that's, I mean, if it's a crime or not, that's up to a jury to decide or the court to decide.
Cynthia.
You asked me a question, Maeve, how would you do this? I don't know. I don't want to know.
How
but
would you
I do
launder
want-
money?
I don't know, but I do want due process to take place. And as a former lawyer, of course, innocent until proven guilty. We've said that, and thanks, Teresa, for reminding us. Trust in politics. Broken down yet again, broken down by the fact that he's been charged, broken down, maybe, we don't know what the ultimate sentence will be or what the ultimate outcome will be, but trust in politics is your basic currency. If you don't uphold the rule of law, the rules, the form filling about your expenses or about your salary or whatever, I find the EU, as a first-time MEP, I find it robust in terms of recording what you get, what you do with it, where you put it, where it ends up, and vouching all of that. And I applaud them. I think that is absolutely required because we have seen other stories, French politicians using their EU income to fund events back in their home countries and so forth. But widespread or any kind of political corruption like this, it undermines the basic belief of citizens in democracy.
Oh, absolutely,
and
especially
that
coming
bothers
from
me
a former justice commissioner. Right? I have to tell you a story. When I was a college student in Germany, the university where I started suffered from book thefts. Students were stealing books from the various libraries.
Of course.
And you know what departments were most
poor
affected?
to pay for
where
them.
people stole most of the books? The law department,
the
the law faculty, and the religion faculty. So the people who should knew best what is right and what is wrong, right?
Yeah, that's a great story. I like
and
that.
And now we have the justice commissioner, former justice commissioner, who had trouble distinguishing that.
I agree, but moving away from the cartoons and moving back to me as an MEP, trying to convey the hard work that I'm getting on with, and I do believe I'm working hard, and I'm going to say it out, but trying to convey that back to voters is going to prove even more difficult.
And are all the Irish MEPs working hard, Cynthia?
I'm sure they are. Look, all as I know is that we've got 14 MEPs and we coalesce very well when it comes to the national interest, but we're very reasonable because we've got to balance it against the other member states and so forth. We're good at politics in Ireland, and we're good Democrats, and we do uphold the rule of law, and sometimes we're so good at adapting the directives and transposing them into Irish law, e.g. planning law, that we add on another 10% of
That's what the
best
Swedes
behaviour.
do, yeah.
Exactly. And that is coming a cropper now in Ireland because obviously we have a housing crisis like most countries in Europe. But look, it's really important that the voters buy into Europe, that they buy into democracy. I don't want to see asylum seekers' properties being burnt or them being attacked because they have a right under the Immigration Pact to move around Europe, to be vetted, to be interviewed, all of that, once it's done efficiently and fairly and promptly. And we do need to maintain human dignity and the rule of law for people in that regard. And what we see then is if we see more of these fat cats who are being charged or maybe convicted, we don't know whether he will be convicted, it is destroying the image of the European Parliament.
Well, on that note, we can bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for being with us, Teresa Küchler as well, and Stefan Grobe. It's been a pleasure to have you all on our very first podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks as well to all those behind the scenes who's helped us get this out. Alicia Carnevali, she's Euronews' podcast producer, and Yorgos Lavidatis, he's Euronews technician. And thanks to the Parliament as well for lending us your lovely podcast studio. If you're not already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on Euronews.com or Euronews' YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review and, of course, spread the word. See you soon.